So it's been a good few months since my last video, but I've been working on coding games in Python and Pygame still, in my spare time, around work commitments, and have just generally been enjoying implementing new features now I'm more used to object-oriented coding. I would like to share with you all that I've done so far, as I'm starting to look into designing a full game around the content I have already have here. Please see my other videos for a full devlog of my first game, a small Metroidvania, available on itch.io, and please subscribe to encourage me to post more. So, let's start with the structure of the game and the code. With the foundation of the previous game, I added a few quality of life improvements here. First was to structure the code better, so there is now a state machine that implements different states such as the room, the map, inventory, which is updated in the main game state. Struggling with the save mechanic with my last game, it worked, but there was a lot of debugging and writing in and out JSON files going on. I decided to put all player variables in one dictionary in the game class. This way you can have multiple dictionaries for, say, save slot 1, save slot 2, and it will only need to write in one JSON file for the game and it will keep all the progress. The biggie for structure was the cutscene and dialogue system I've implemented, which I will show and explain in a bit more detail towards the end of this video. So moving on to the camera system. The camera is basically all of the level and room sprites put into a group, and then making that group the camera class, which then has a custom draw method which offsets the view. I highly recommend ClearCode's tutorial on the logic of a 2D platformer in Pygame for this, which can be found in the description. On top of this, I've added limits to the edges of the room, which are dynamic based on which room you are in. There is a function on the camera class which gets the room size and sets the borders, or rather limits the view. I have added blooming and lighting effects, parallax backgrounds and moving clouds. The clouds unfortunately aren't shown here, as I removed the code snippet for debugging when recording this annoyingly. So the biggest improvement to this camera, in my opinion, is passing a target variable into the camera. Normally this is set to the player, but when the player runs into an invisible cutscene sprite, the cutscene code runs, and within this you can change that target variable to whatever you want, so the camera can focus and move towards any sprite at any time, and I'll talk more about this towards the end of this video. So, improving the general platforming and game feel. I wanted to perfect the platforming, the movement and the mechanics in this game. I rewrote an entity class with 2D vector movement and made the player inherit from this. The entity class got big, but it can be mostly left alone and add player specific functions to the player class to keep it minimal. With this in place, I added variable jump height, acceleration and friction, and of course coyote time, like any good platformer should have. I did some other small things such as different animations for every other sword swipe using the modulo function to tell it which animations to use, and other animation for if the sword hits a wall, which is a small but nice touch, and of course that will have a different sound to it too. Another big improvement was to give every sprite a hitbox. Basically set hitbox variable as a scaled inflated version of the sprite's rectangle, then when moving the sprite, center the hitbox rect to the sprite's rect center. This gives a lot more freedom to make animations look better as you have more space around your hitbox. Moving on to the combat then. So the melee is basically a Hyperlight Drifter-esque combat system, basically 3 swipes and a cooldown. What did take a while, but I managed to get right in the end, was to get a special attack to work when you hold the button down instead of just a standard sword swipe. So if the attack button is held, it will build up and do a special attack, as you can see in the video. Pygame will not recognise the difference between key pressed and key held, so I coded the melee into the key up event and the special attack to the key held, and it works a treat now. So moving on to ranged combat, I needed something, so I added a gun. So there is a screen shake test for this, as can be seen, which I think works well and I'll probably keep. You get a small lunge forward with the melee attack, but the gun kicks you back a bit, and both give you hang time in the air, so we will see how these mechanics work when I add more enemies to the game. For now you can see just placeholder sprites for where the enemies are. Like any good Metroidvania, the character has abilities. Of course there is a wall hang and a wall slide which you can see, they have no animations yet however, and there is a dash. So all Metroidvania staple features are covered and everything is coded with adjustability in mind. So I can just change variables to give greater cooldowns, distances, speeds to each mechanic, etc. Including the rate at which the player decelerates when lunging and being knocked back. So let's move on to the GUI. Let's talk about the health and the shield system. So I wanted a health system like other Metroidvanias where you start with a few hit points and can get maybe twice as many more as you progress to the end of the game or so. I also wanted to add a shield element. So the shields will take hits before your health points drop, so I added 2 extra shields, as you can see, green and blue, which only appear in the GUI if they are in the player's dictionary. So you can see they have a refresh timer on them, and of course this is also adjustable for in-game buffs. I was a bit scared with this, but it took me only one evening to implement, as it happens. Pretty much just using Pygame rects with radius, and the height of the shield boxes are just tied to the ratio of the current shield amount divided by the box height. So once the shield is gone, it auto-fills, and if it's at 100% it will be used instead of health. The stamina refresh bar at the top is the same for the special attack cooldown. So while we're on the GUI, let's move on to menus. So I've added an inventory system. I'm quite proud of this, as I learned a lot about looping through grids here and blitting images. So you can go to inventory by pressing I and then click on amulets, which is of course nothing similar to Hollow Knight's charm system. I've actually never played Hollow Knight, and you can equip amulets that you already have. These are basically 2 lists in the player's dictionary. One is the list of amulets they already have, and one is the list of equipped amulets. So in game, if these are in the equipped amulet list, the player will get the relevant upgrade applied to them. I need a couple more of these for a shop system I also plan to implement. So there's even more stuff. I've been playing around with lots of different sprites and have got a bit better at pixel art in the process. This comes more naturally to me than coding, so I have a folder full of redundant animations and sprites that I probably should put together as asset packs for itch.io. You can see a mishmash here in my testing game, which has some solid code snippets I plan to put into the game, such as the coin drop system you can see, where their coins are drawn to the player after they're dropped by enemies, a crouch mechanic when pressing down, and an enemy sort of build up before they attack mechanic. And the one I'm most proud of is cutscenes and dialogue boxes. So I managed to create an RPG style dialogue which is tied to a dictionary of various NPCs and their relevant dialogue. Press space to interact fade box appears when you are colliding with the NPCs, and the dialogue then shows. It can delay the time between characters and will blip full speed when holding spacebar. And the cutscenes, well, I learned a lot here, and it required forward planning from the very beginning. I made sure there was a player input function in the entity class which handled all of the player key presses, and for each thing the player wants to do, there is only one function or flag that is called in the entity class. Then, in the room update function where everything happens, the player input function runs if there is no cutscene running. If the player collides with a cutscene sprite, the relevant cutscene takes over, and the camera and inputs based on a timer. So the cutscene starts a timer, then with a list of if statements at particular points in time, you can literally do the whole cutscene logic in one function. You can set the room target to whatever sprite you want, and the camera will pan to center on it, and you can call any of the entity's input functions on any character in the scene. So you can make the player move, crouch, jump, or even make the enemies and NPCs do the same, as all the logic is in the entity class, of which all the characters inherit from. You can also call the dialogue state within the cutscene. So thanks for watching, and I hope it all made sense. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments if you need clarification, and please like and subscribe. I plan to make a good quality game from this, and I have no time limit, so any improvements, features or feedback in general is greatly appreciated.